When I was young, my mom used to tell me stories about my grandpa. She said he started with nothing and built a successful business that could have set us up for life. But we never got any of that money. I didn't really understand why until I got older and learned about his will and everything. Aliza, your grandpa was a tough man, my mom said one cold evening as we sat at our small kitchen table with cups of lukewarm tea. The heater was broken again, and the landlord wasn't quick to fix things. He believed only in earning money, not giving it away. Why did he cut us off then? Didn't he trust you to manage his money? I asked, trying not to sound bitter. Mom sighed, her eyes following the steam from her cup. It wasn't about me managing it. He had this strange idea. He made a will that only left his money to someone who made a big success on their own, like $500,000 in their own business. That's just mean, I muttered. The idea sounded crazy, again set by a man who cared more about money than his family. It was his way or no way, Mom continued. When I argued with him, he practically disowned me. He said if I was any good, I'd earn my way without his help. It felt so unfair. We were struggling to save every penny while someone else out there was enjoying what should have been ours. Ever since I was a kid, I was good at finding ways to make money. I'd set up a lemonade stand at the local golf course on hot summer days, shouting 50 cents a cup to thirsty golfers passing by. You sure know how to hustle, kiddo, an old golfer named Hank once told me, laughing as he handed me his change. Keep that up and you'll be a tycoon one day. I grinned and pocketed the coins. Just saving up for something big, I'd say. My mind was always on the next big thing, and it wasn't just about lemonade. I used to make homemade necklaces and bracelets by stringing beads together from the dollar store. I sold them wherever I could, neighborhood block parties, school events, and even in the front yard during garage sales. Trading and selling didn't just feel fun. It felt like something I was meant to do. Elisa's got her own little business empire going, my mom would joke to her friends, but there was a hint of pride in her voice that made me stand a little taller. But it was sewing that really took off for me. When I managed to buy an old sewing machine from a garage sale, it felt like the best gift ever. Teaching myself to sew wasn't easy. The machine was temperamental, and the online tutorials were confusing, especially with the internet cutting in and out. But I stuck with it. Soon, I was turning plain thrift store clothes into stylish outfits. One day as Sarah caught me at my locker, she sneered, "Is that the same shirt you wore last week? Looks different, doesn't it?" "Gave it a little makeover," I replied casually, slamming my locker shut. "You should try it sometime. Might improve your attitude." She scoffed and started to walk away, but a couple of other girls lingered. "That was really cool what you did with your shirt. Could you do mine?" one of them asked shyly. "Sure thing. Bring it tomorrow," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. Word got around, and soon I was taking custom orders. It wasn't just pocket money anymore. It was a real business. People paid good money for unique clothes, and I was happy to provide. One sunny afternoon, I took my latest creations to the local street fair. I set up a rickety table, laid out my garments, and waited nervously. "You think people will buy these, Mike?" my friend asked skeptically, eyeing the passers-by. "They'd be crazy not to," I shot back confidently. And buy they did. My table was swarmed. I barely had time to collect the money and hand over the clothes. Amidst the chaos, a guy approached with his car keys. Jack jingled his car keys in his hand, approaching me at my stall. "Hey, my car broke down a block from here. Saw your stall. This stuff yours?" he asked, nodding towards my makeshift display. "Yeah, all made by me. You need something to pass the time while waiting for a tow," I joked, handing him a shirt. He laughed genuinely, head thrown back. "Actually, I was wondering if you do men's stuff too." "Sure do," I replied, pulling out a few pieces I'd experimented with. He looked them over, then at me with a spark of interest. "You've got talent. Ever think of making this a real business?" "Every day," I said, not missing a beat. His smile widened. "I'm Jack, by the way." "Eliza," I said, shaking his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another sale. This felt like a doorway swinging wide open. As the day wound down, I counted the cash, a sense of accomplishment washing over me. This was it. I was making it happen one stitch at a time. "I told you they love your stuff," Mike said, helping me pack up. "Yes, you were right," I admitted, unable to keep the grin off my face. Looks like I might just make that $500,000 mark after all. After meeting Jack at the fair, things moved faster than I expected. He wasn't like the guys I knew. He came from money. But he had a way of making you forget about that when you were with him. He had this laid-back vibe, always laughing, always making plans. We started seeing each other more, and it wasn't long before we were seriously dating. One day, he said, "Eliza, I think it's time you met my parents." The thought alone made my stomach churn. I knew his folks came from old money, the kind that looked down on people like me. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice tense. "I don't think they'll like me much." Jack laughed it off. "They'll love you. Don't worry so much." The drive over to Jack's parents' house felt like the longest ride of my life. Jack kept talking about mundane stuff, probably trying to ease the tension, but my stomach was in knots. We turned into a long driveway, and there it was, a massive house that looked more like a museum than a home. We walked up to the grand entrance, and the door swung open before we could even knock. There stood Jack's mom, Mrs. Thompson, dressed impeccably in a way that made me feel underdressed instantly, despite my careful choice of outfit. "Jack, darling," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug, then turned to me with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be Eliza. We've heard so much about you." Her words sounded warm, but her tone was anything but. I forced a smile. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Thompson." Jack led me inside, and that's when Mr. Thompson appeared, a tall, stern-looking man with a firm handshake that felt more like a test than a greeting. "Eliza, a pleasure," he said, his voice deep and unemotional. We moved into the living room, which was as grand and cold as the rest of the house. Everything felt stiff and formal. We made small talk, or at least they did. I mostly nodded and smiled, feeling out of my depth. Dinner was served in a dining room straight out of a magazine, with crystal and fine china that looked like it should be locked up in a display case, not used for eating. We sat down, and that's when the real interrogation. The encounter with Jack's parents was tense from the start. Mr. Thompson, eyeing me like I was a problem, began with a pointed question. "So, Eliza, Jack tells us you're into fashion design." "Yes, I run a small business designing and selling clothing," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Self-made then." "How entrepreneurial," he commented dryly, his tone more critical than complimentary. Mrs. Thompson chimed in, her smile feeling insincere. "And your family, dear? What do they do?" "Well, it's just me and my mom. She's a nurse," I said, feeling the weight of each word. "I see," Mrs. Thompson replied, exchanging a glance with her husband. The conversation stumbled along until coffee was served, and then Mrs. Thompson's polite facade dropped. "Eliza, I must be honest. We have certain hopes for Jack, and his partner's background is important to us. It's essential for maintaining the family's reputation and legacy," she said flatly. "Well, it's clear you've accomplished quite a bit despite your background, but I don't think you're suitable for our son, I'm afraid," she concluded abruptly, putting down her fork and leaving the room without another word. I sat there stunned, feeling like I'd been slapped. Jack was quick to comfort me, embarrassed by his parents' behavior. "Eliza, please don't take it to heart. She's just set in her ways." Despite Jack's reassurances, the evening left a cold shadow over what should have been a happy milestone. The engagement happened, but the chill from his parents was something I couldn't shake off. A few weeks after our engagement, Mrs. Thompson called me. Her voice was formal. "Eliza, I'd like you to come over. We need to discuss something important." When I arrived, both of Jack's parents were waiting. The house felt colder than ever. Mrs. Thompson wasted no time, her tone sharp and unwelcoming. "Eliza, we've looked into your background thoroughly. It's clear you come from a very different world than ours," she began. "It's clear you're hunting for wealth, climbing through our son, but we won't allow our family fortune to be jeopardized," she continued, her words stinging. Before I could react, Mrs. Thompson slid a stack of papers across the table towards me. "Since I can't convince Jack to rethink this marriage, you'll need to sign these," she said flatly. I picked up the papers. They were a prenuptial agreement. As I read through it, I realized I wouldn't lay claim to any of Jack's wealth, and neither would any children we might have. Without hesitating, I signed them. "I'm not marrying Jack for his money," I said firmly, handing the signed papers back to her. Mrs. Thompson looked taken aback, and even Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, surprised by my quick compliance. Leaving their house, I felt a mix of relief and resentment. At home, I told Jack everything. He laughed it off. Wow, you really showed them. Good for you. As the wedding drew closer, excitement and stress filled my life. My sportswear brand, built from scratch, was finally taking off. Seeing my designs worn and loved was thrilling, and I had accumulated a small capital to expand and take on bigger challenges. Regarding the wedding, I envisioned something simple and intimate, but Jack dreamed of a lavish celebration. Eliza, we're only doing this once. Let's make it big, he'd say with that persuasive grin of his. Reluctantly, I agreed, and we planned a grand event. I found myself negotiating deals and discounts wherever possible to manage the expenses. The wedding day appeared perfect on the surface. Our guests seemed to enjoy themselves, and Jack and I were caught up in a bubble of joy. However, not everyone shared our enthusiasm. Throughout the evening, I noticed Jack's parents whispering disapprovingly, their faces pinched with disapproval. His mother, ever the social butterfly, dropped hints to relatives about her worries that I was after their family wealth. I overheard her commenting loudly about the extravagance of the event, expressing concerns about my understanding of money. After the wedding, things didn't settle down. Jack's mom posted on social media, lamenting that Jack had married someone like me, expressing her fear of losing her son to a woman she deemed unworthy. Reading those words hurt deeply, stirring frustration and sadness within me. I tried to discuss it with Jack. Your mom's posts, they're really harsh. Can you talk to them? They don't even know about the business, how well it's doing. Jack sighed, troubled. Eliza, I know it's tough, but let's not rock the boat, okay? My parents, it's just how they are. They'll come around, they just need time to see what I see. Despite my doubts, I agreed to let it go. Exhausted from the ongoing tension, I poured my energy into my business, something positive and wholly mine. Despite personal turmoil, my brand continued to grow. Orders poured in, and I gained a following, doing interviews, photo shoots, and discussing partnerships. The evening of the charity dinner arrived, held at a swanky hotel downtown. The event supported sports programs for kids and teenagers. As the main costume designer, I chose a blue and white theme that complemented the decor and showcased my latest sportswear pieces. Walking into the grand hall with Jack, surrounded by well-dressed guests and shimmering lights, I felt nervous yet determined. The excitement of seeing my designs showcased in a grand setting quickly soured when we spotted Jack's parents across the room. Their cold stares cut through the warmth of the bustling crowd. Jack noticed but said nothing, and their blatant disregard stunned me deeply. But I bit my lip and kept walking. As guests began to arrive, I circulated the room, chatting and networking. Jack was by my side, his usual charming self, but I could tell he was a bit overwhelmed by the scale of the event. You're really pulling out all the stops, huh? Jack commented as we watched the crowd from a distance. Go big or go home, right? I replied with a wink. Eliza, you've outdone yourself, a familiar voice said from behind me. Turning around, I saw a local sports celebrity who'd worn my designs before. These uniforms are fantastic. Thanks so much. Enjoy the evening. I smiled, handing them a business card. Let's catch up soon. The event was buzzing, the atmosphere electric with enthusiasm and goodwill. Then the moment of truth arrived. The host took to the stage to thank the sponsors, and my heart raced as he started to speak. We haven't been seated long when the evening's presenter took the stage to kick off the event. The atmosphere was lively, filled with applause and cheer, until it came time to thank the sponsors. My heart raced with pride and anxiety as my name was announced as one of the main contributors. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Eliza, whose generous donation of over $300,000 made tonight possible. The presenter boomed through the microphone. The room erupted in applause but was abruptly pierced by a shriek from Mrs. Thompson, Jack's mother. Absolutely not, she screamed, drawing the room into shocked silence. She demanded a microphone, and once it was handed to her, she didn't hesitate. This is preposterous. Eliza couldn't possibly afford this. She's nothing but a poor beggar using my son's money. She's a cunning predator sneaking into our family to bankrupt us. Her words echoed through the hall, venomous and loud. The presenter, taken aback but composed, quickly tried to correct the situation. Mrs. Thompson, I assure you, you are mistaken. Eliza's company is extremely successful and fully capable of such generosity. I know this firsthand. The crowd murmured, tension palpable. Then, in an unexpected move, the presenter passed the microphone to Jack, hoping for him to clear the air. Jack's face was a mix of embarrassment and conflict. He glanced at his parents, then at me, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke into the mic. "I have nothing to say," he said, then walked over to his parents, leaving me standing alone amidst the sea of whispers. The weight of the moment settled heavy on my shoulders. I felt exposed and humiliated, not just by the accusations, but by Jack's refusal to defend me or affirm the truth about my success. The pride I had felt in my contribution was tarnished, overshadowed by the drama unfolding around me. Stepping into the spotlight, I approached the microphone, my heart pounding but my resolve clear. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the tumult of emotions. "Tonight, I'd like to share something very personal about my journey." The room fell silent, all attention on me. I started as a street entrepreneur, driven not just to make ends meet but by a dream. That dream led to the creation of a sportswear brand that many of you know now. Pausing, I looked around, meeting the eyes of young athletes and seasoned businessmen alike. When my company's profits hit $500,000, I fulfilled a promise to a very special person, my grandfather. He left a will stating that his inheritance would go to a relative who made their own success, reaching that exact figure in their business. Whispers filled the hall, and I took a moment to let that sink in. That inheritance has been used to fuel not just my personal growth, but to give back through charity, much like tonight's event. I continued. The crowd was listening, some nodding as I unfolded more of my story. After the pandemic, my business didn't just survive, it thrived, growing several times over. Every challenge faced was a stepping stone. As I concluded, I stood before them not just as a business owner, but as someone who believed in the power of perseverance and dedication. The room erupted into applause, some guests standing in ovation. I scanned the crowd, seeing faces light up with respect and admiration. But my eyes briefly caught Jack's parents. Their expressions, once haughty, now showed disbelief and embarrassment. They quietly exited the hotel. Jack, looking equally shaken, tried to approach me, muttering an apology. "Eliza, I just shook my head and walked past him, my emotions a mix of triumph and heartache. I needed space, not just from the evening's drama, but from everything. Deciding to stay at the hotel that night, alone with my thoughts, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was thick with emotion. "Honey, I saw everything. I just want you to know how proud I am to see you stand up there, telling your story, reclaiming your truth. You're everything I hoped you'd be." After spending a night at the hotel to clear my head, I returned home. The place felt different, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves held the tension from the last few months. Jack was there, waiting. As soon as he saw me, he tried to apologize again. "Eliza, I'm so sorry about everything. Can we just forget all this and start over?" he pleaded, his voice desperate. I shook my head, the decision heavy on my heart, but clear in my mind. "Jack, I can't. I don't want to be with someone who can't stand up for me, who sides with his parents over his wife. It's not just about last night. This has been building for a long time," I continued. His face fell, and he reached out, but I stepped back. "I'm filing for divorce," I said firmly. I didn't wait for his response. Gathering a few essentials, I left for my mother's house, the one I recently bought with the inheritance from my grandfather. It felt like a sanctuary. The divorce proceedings were straightforward, thanks to the prenup we had signed, and with no children to consider, it was over quickly. During that time, Jack's parents tried to intervene. They called repeatedly, trying to patch things up, not for my sake, but because their son's lifestyle had changed now that I was out of the picture. I blocked their numbers, not just to silence the constant ringing, but to cut off a past that was holding me back. From friends, I heard Jack started drinking, lost his job, and eventually his parents disowned him, not wanting to tarnish their reputation with his downward spiral. Despite everything, I never wished him ill, but I knew I needed to move on. Living at my mom's place gave me the peace I needed to think about my next steps. The business was still thriving, and I poured more of myself into it, not just to distract from the divorce, but to rebuild stronger foundations for my future. One evening, sitting in the garden my mom and I had started together, she turned to me, a soft smile on her face. "You did the right thing, Eliza. It's tough, but you're tougher. And I'm here always." "Thanks, Mom. I know it's just a lot to process," I replied, feeling the weight of her support. As long as you remember that you're not just surviving, you're building, learning, and growing. That's what matters, she said, squeezing my hand. She was right. The end of my marriage wasn't just an ending. It was a gateway to a new chapter, one where I could make decisions without second guessing if someone had my back, one where I could stand on my own, not just as a successful businesswoman, but as a person reshaped by her experiences.